Hi, my name is Angelica Hervis. You guys can call me Ange. What's happening? Welcome to another installment of Ñapitas. So Ñapita is sort of like a little extra that you get in like any sort of situation that you find yourself in. Like a little, maybe like a little chocolate or maybe like a little art tip. So in today's Ñapita, I'm going to be talking about designing LGBTQ friendly characters for animated music videos, or AMVs for short. So I'm going to be using as an example the Fishtank Lover for the animated music video for Panic at the Disco's I Write Sins Not Tragedies that debuted this last summer in 2022 for the VMAs performance. I was the art director, character designer, and storyboard artist for that project, so I think Fishtank Lover will be the perfect example for that. So when you're designing a character, first of all, before we even go anywhere designing for minorities, when you're designing for a character, you're thinking about who this person is and what is their role in this universe. So I was designing for Brendan Urie. Brendan Urie is the lead singer for Panic at the Disco and is an ally, LGBTQ ally in the community. He himself has come out as pansexual, so definitely designing a character that was LGBTQ friendly for the music video just sort of felt like something that he would appreciate and that his fan base would definitely appreciate it. I never mentioned that the character of the Fishtank Lover was LGBTQ while working with MTV or with Cartoona. It was very like sort of subtle, like what if we do this? When I presented the character designs, and they loved it. I worked with Cartoona before and MTV, and they have always been wonderful and supportive of me as an art director, just doing whatever it is I want to help tell the story and to just design what I think would best benefit the finished product. And I'm very grateful for that because I get to do characters that would generally just not get often done in big productions, like the Fishtank Lover. So for Fishtank Lover, I knew right away that this had to be a circus theme, right? It had to go in hand with Brendan's iconic VMA performance for 2006, and it had to also go a little bit of like a reference to their past work. So obviously in the original Panic at the Disco I Write Sins Not Tragedies music video, it's sort of like this big wedding and a little bit of like a steampunk circus vibe, like a dark circus, and I'm like, ooh, I'd like to go with that. And then you start brainstorming what kind of characters are in the setting, like what kind of characters would you find in a circus. So ringmaster Brendan Urie, a clown or an acrobat of some sort, which ended up being like the clown groom in the music video, a bearded lady, a strong man, and I just kept thinking like, who do I want the romantic interest to be for our main character hero? And I landed upon as I was doing research, and I always recommend do research on who you're making work for, even though you have a clear story. It's like, oh, it's a circus. None of the other music videos relate to circuses. It doesn't matter because you never know where inspiration is gonna strike, and that's exactly what happened to me. So I was doing research for the music video, and I'm like, what kind of reference will inform this other character, this romantic interest? I remember this iconic music video by Panic at the Disco called Flying is the Most Fun a Girl Can Have Without Taking Her Clothes Off, where all of the characters have this sort of like fish tank around their heads. And I'm like, what else can you find in a circus? You could find mermaids, or at least that's what they would tell you they were back then. But like, you could find a mermaid in a circus, in a what was unsavourily called freak shows back then. Mermaids, I didn't want to just be a mermaid. I wanted to sort of play with the trope of like a mermaid and more like a mer person, and even bring forth even more like that fish out of water element by turning the character into a trans character. And doing so started to sort of piece together who this character was going to be, and just from this one image my brain was already like buzzing with ideas. So I went to the very first concept art I did for the characters, and this is something that I recommend all the time to fledgling artists who come to me for feedback or who come to me with questions about I don't know how to design a character, I don't know where to start, I don't know like how to get like something on that blank white page. And my advice to them is just it's not probably the most helpful advice, but it would be do your research and just do it. Just get those ideas down on paper. Do a messy sketch, do a messy doodle, do something that could fit in a sticky note to just get like the main parts of who your character is out into paper, like out from your head and into paper. Because in here, it's always going to be like that expectation of perfection that is living in your head. But once it's on paper, you can sort of like see where you're at more clearly. And it's like, okay, I see the elements that work, I see the elements that don't, and you can start pulling them back or like pushing them in depending on like what you want your character to look like. So right away, these were like some of the initial characters. I wasn't even worried about proportions, I wasn't worried about stylization. I just did this really messy sketch on TV Paint, open it up. TV Paint is perfect for that because I just don't overthink it as much as I do with Photoshop. I think I've built this sort of barrier in my own head where if I'm working on Photoshop, it's serious, it's professional, it's like what big studios use, right, for illustrations and character designs. And it can be a little bit overwhelming, but when I'm in TV Paint, because the tools are so bare bones, I can sort of feel more at ease. I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna do a messy doodle and not even think about it, and that's where a lot of my character designs sort of grow, because I can find the elements I like. So in here I had a very rudimentary design of who the mer person was. But for Fishtank Lover, I already knew I wanted like a very square shape for the head to sort of contrast the very triangle sharp look for the groom. I wanted something to do with bubbles or sea foam, something that was round so it could contrast beautifully with not only the sharpness of Brendan and the groom, but also the sort of cage that mer person has to live in order to exist in the circus, in the upside world. Square eyes for their pupils, so they have a little bit of edge and style, because the groom had like the diamond eyes, Brendan had like rectangle eyes, Muscle Man had like the really round circle coin eyes, Bearded Lady had oval eyes. So I sort of wanted everybody to have like their own geometric shape, and Square just fitted mer person perfectly because it went with like the squareness of the fish tank. I was already finding elements. I wanted like the square fish tank, I wanted square pupils, I wanted like pointy teeth to contrast with the softness of the collar and the fluffy hair that was also like either like sea foam or even like jellyfish tentacles or octopus tentacles. And very early on, I knew that I wanted them to be trans and non-binary. I played with them having a fisherman's apron or a butcher's apron or like a wife beater top of some sort, because again, I'm playing with gender expectations and traditions. And you think of like these sailors and fishermen who have like these like heavy aprons and they're out at sea and they're rugged and manly, and then that sort of uniform almost is placed on very weak and almost feminine passing figure, and almost a contradiction of sorts, because we've been so hardwired to think of this item of clothing being masculine. I didn't stick with it because I definitely wanted to show that this was a trans character. I didn't want to be subtle about it. It mattered to me in the sense because I have friends and family members and people online that I follow who are trans and who don't see themselves represented in media in a positive light. This isn't the first time that I designed a trans character either, a trans man. I designed one for an advertisement a while back. I found so many people online reacting positively to that, like, oh, I never see trans characters represented in media. To be honest, representation for LGBTQ characters is very limited in media, let alone animation. One would say even abysmal. We are seeing that sort of shift with shows like Hera or Owl House being more LGBTQ friendly, but even then, you don't often see trans characters being represented in animation. I think the most obvious and glowing example of it would be the Sailor Starlights from Sailor Moon, who are male presenting in their day-to-day lives, but then are female presenting when they transform into the Sailor Starlights. And that's one of, at least that I can easily recall from the top of my head, that aren't fan theories, because showrunners are either too scared to admit that these characters are LGBTQ or trans, or they're not allowed to do so by big studios. It happens a lot more often than you think. From there, I moved into character design. So the most obvious way that you can tell that a character is a trans man would be having trans scars on their chest, where their breast tissue has been removed, so they, can be male presenting, or can be more closer to a male biology. And that's something that I wanted to include with red lines. So the entire music video, it's very limited color palette, it's almost monochromatic. It's black, white, and red. And that's it. That was a stylistic choice, but it was also a budgeting and deadline choice. I didn't have time, even with the wonderful team that I had, I didn't have time to pull the bells and whistles on coloring. So I'm like, okay, every character is just going to be monochromatic. Maybe they're going to have like a couple of red highlights to enhance certain characteristics of them, but we're just going to keep it as minimalistic as possible. And with Merperson, I was very judicious with the red that I was going to use. Like the producer of Cartoona at one point suggested coloring the hair red, and I just thought that was like way too close to The Little Mermaid, and I didn't want people's head to go there. I didn't want them to think of The Little Mermaid when they looked at the Fishtank Lover. I just wanted them to see the Fishtank Lover. So I used the red very minimally on highlighting those trans scars. I didn't want to hide them. I didn't want them to be confused with pectorals, and for the character to be confused as gay. I wanted them to be trans, and that was very important for me and for the rest of the team. In the exploration phase of the characters, I usually go for a lot of action poses, for a lot of acting poses. I'm not too worried at this point of staying on model, or keeping tabs on like what looks right or what looks wrong. I'm just exploring how the character looks, how they react in this world, and how they exist in general. And that's something that I also recommend to beginners. Do as many drawings of this character as you can, even if a lot of it doesn't end up in the final image. Like I have images of the character crying here, showing vulnerability. That never made it into the final animated music video. It was in the storyboards, the very rough initial storyboards, and it was quickly axed. But at least I knew what this character would look like when they were in distress, and that's something that usually gets overlooked in the character design sheet stage. And when your animators are getting to that point where they have to add some acting, they don't know the range of how this character reacts. They don't know when to pull back and when to really push it, because they don't have a scale of motion of this character. And I wanted Fishtank Lover to feel very delicate, so you can always see like their hands and their arms are very close to the body, very almost like a straight, prideful posture, and not necessarily prideful in a negative sense, but like they are comfortable who they are in their body, but they're also very shy. And you can see that sort of like with the peeking over the shoulder here, or the way that they sort of sit, and they have like a little bit of a hunch on their shoulders being one of the very few parts of their body that is completely sharp, as you can see here in the model sheet. Like everything is sharp about these shoulders, the same way with the fish tank on their head, because they're trying to sort of accommodate themselves into this world that's so rigid and straight-laced and full of lines. And that's sort of like showing on the heaviness that they feel on their shoulders in this circus as a performer. Because otherwise everything is like very soft, very curvy, especially in the bobbles, in the way that their hips curve out into the subtle hint of a fishtail, sort of jellyfish, octopus tentacle hair that curves into their face and frames it so delicately. these are just sort of like, again, explorations of how your character will, if they're happy, if they're smiling, if they're crying, if they're shouting, if they are being kissed by a certain groom. And a lot of these really informed the storyboards later on. Like this shot in here definitely makes it into that very first time we see Fishtank Lover as they peek over their shoulder to look at the groom on their first meet cute. This in particular, it made it into some of the very first storyboards, and it breaks my heart that it didn't make it, just because, same with this one, that they're holding a frame. So in the original story boards that were informed from these very first explorations, like, okay, why is this character sad? Why are they looking at a frame? I'm like, okay, maybe Muscle Man was their original lover, and Muscle Man is cheating on them with the bearded lady. So it becomes a story of these two characters being both heartbroken by their beloveds, by their significant others, and that's how they come together. The idea of kissing the fish tank and sort of leaving your mark, leaving an impression on this person, and the romanticism of it. And I had to cut it all out because it was a music video, not a short film, and it was just getting too long, and the music video wasn't about their story. There's this a B story. The main story is Brendan and his matchmaking and giving a performance at the same time. So it has to be cut, but it lives on in the character design sheet, and at least I'm happy with it. You know, sometimes you have good ideas and they work, and sometimes they don't. And this is a classic example of me just experimenting and having these explorations inspire or envision a little bit of the future animatic. Character sheet here also includes little notes for staying on model for the animators. So staying on model is really important for character consistency, because if we don't have these details of the characters, like how high their chest is in comparison to like their shoulder width, or how far apart their eyes are, how wide does their mouth stretch, all of these little details that inform who a character is need to be nailed down during the character sheet process, because otherwise your characters are going to look vastly different, especially in a production. If you're working on your own work, you could probably get away with it. I wouldn't recommend working without a character sheet, but if you're working on your own work, that's fine. But once you have a production team of, let's say, 5, 10, 20 animators, and they're all working on the same characters, you need to have that consistency throughout the project, because otherwise it's just going to be very distracting for your viewer. And to focus on who they were as a character, as opposed to, oh man, why does the character look so Yankee in this frame as opposed to that frame? So little notes like this for the animators, like tank is the same height and width regardless of the angle, almost a perfect square, so it's like a 3 by 4 frame format. Notes like these are really helpful for them. And it might not work in, you know, real life rules, because if I'm looking at you as a profile and I turn my head is now slightly longer than it used to. Like the dimensions of my head have now dramatically shifted, because they're making space to accommodate for like the back of my head, the back of my hair, and other details that, you know, naturally move in space. But in here, this fish tank wouldn't work like that maybe, but because this is animation and you can sort of fudge the rules a bit, it can work, and it's a stylistic choice. And when you can push those boundaries with intention, I always recommend you do so, because it makes for a really cool effect, and it also might save some of your animators a bit of heartache of having to think about, like, oh my god, how does this square move in space? I don't have to do the math. It'll always be 3 by 4, whether it's up, down, or sideways. Some of the other notes I made for the character sheet was pupils are square, only character besides the bride to use curved lines, which I've mentioned before, but use sparingly on foam color and hair. And I didn't want alienation to be what you felt when you looked at this character. I wanted you to feel endearment, and I wanted you to look at Merperson and feel the same, like, romantic flourish, like that first blush of true love that Groom felt when he laid eyes on them. Needed to immediately communicate that this is our romantic interest, and this is who we're happy we're gonna end up with. Your animation notes might not even make it into the animation. So I made a note here that I did only for my benefit, because this is about character design, is about world building and about building a believable character that can live outside of this music video. So if outside of the fish tank Lover's curly waves would not be crushed and reveal their length. So because these curls are inside this fish tank, if I were to grab my own hair and push it up, like this is what probably it would look like, right? But once out of a fish tank, it just flows naturally. And that's something that I included as an animation detail, so they can have an understanding of how this hair works. So they don't think it's just a very short hair. They can understand that, oh, these are long tendrils that live inside of this apparatus. But outside, they will probably be long. So they animate accordingly. And we never get to see this in the animation, in the final animation. But at least your animators and you know that it exists, and it can inform any future shots that you create. So this is like your basic character sheet for a character in a music video. You have your turnaround, where you see the character from the front 3/4, profile, and back. Action and expression sheets here at the bottom, some animation notes, and then we're ready to do a head turnaround. So head turnarounds really excite me because they can double as cheat sheets for animation. So again, I was talking earlier about how extensive the amount of work is for 2D animation, and this is a perfect example of subverting that by creating something that your animators can trace while they're animating. So obviously, I was the character designer, and I was familiar with how Merperson or Fishtank Lover had to look like from every angle. But I had a team of 4 other animators and a cleanup artist, and they weren't as familiar with it. So this is where cheat sheets come in handy. I did the character in several different angles with like a very passive expression and very passive motion, and we actually used these a lot throughout production. Like even in one of the shots, Merperson had to like look slightly up, so the animator basically traced these. And listen, is it cheating if it works? I don't think so. And who gets to decide what is cheating in animation? There are tools here that can help facilitate the production of your vision, and using them isn't bad. And my animators were very appreciative of it too. So I think it was very successful in telling an LGBTQ story in a way that's respectful, in a way that's inclusive and whimsical, and all the things that we get to see with a lot of straight characters, but we don't often get to see with LGBTQ characters. To end this, there is no reason why we can't tell these stories in inspiring ways. I want people to look at the screen and be like, this character is just like me. And I hope when you saw the music video, whether you noticed that the character was trans, whether you didn't notice that the character is trans, I hope that you enjoyed their story and their happy ending. Because I know I did, and so did the rest of the team. So thank you for listening, and yeah, see you in the next one. Bye!